Hey everyone, so welcome to MLB Trade History podcast. I am one of the co-hosts, Scott Tauber, and with me today is
Amir Malikpour.
Amir and I are doing this podcast recording from a few blocks north of AT&T Ballpark in San Francisco, California. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to discuss one of our MLB Trade History, our topic for today's podcast, but also we're going to do a quick recap on the 2014 MLB trade deadline deals and see the winners and losers from that. But before that, today's podcast topic, which is the Sammy Sosa for Jorge Bell deal from, I believe, 1992, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to say more about that, Amir?
Yeah, so just going over the players, Jorge Bell was one of the best players in Blue Jays history.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up signing with the White Sox,
Mm-hmm.
and then after a pretty good year with the White Sox, they ended up flipping him for a young up-and-comer gentleman with a wisdom tooth problem, which prohibits him from eating. That's why he's not as big and hitting home runs, Sammy Sosa. And a middle relief pitcher who actually had a pretty good year before he got traded to the White Sox. I think he had a 2.8 ERA with the Cubs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, with the White Sox
Mm-hmm.
before going to the Cubs.
Yep.
And so what's so interesting about, I guess on the Jorge Bell side was he was actually drafted by the Phillies originally.
Mm-hmm.
And but then they let him go. Like they actually, the Blue Jays ended up like just picking him up as a Rule 5 draftee, so he didn't even start out in their farm system.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some interesting things to say about Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, I mean, Sammy Sosa, that trade from the White Sox to the Cubs, that was, well, first of all, it's one of those rare Chicago trades that occurred. But, that was the second time Sammy Sosa got traded early in his career. And, he's someone who came up in the Texas Rangers organization and was, let go prematurely, maybe in part by George W. Bush's, ownership of the Rangers. He kind of, before ruining the Rangers, he ruined this country, ruined the Rangers. Just kidding there. That's a podcast for another episode, different podcast category too. But, I think they grew impatient with him, and maybe they saw something with whom they got back at that time, Harold Baines. I think the White Sox also grew impatient with Sammy Sosa and then quickly flipped him to the Cubs for Jorge Bell, who, had, I believe, the one good season with the White Sox and was retired, I believe, within like 3 years of that trade, approximately. And, Sammy Sosa found his way, or his wisdom, or whatever it is. I always thought the wisdom tooth issue was more related to why he needed an interpreter in court. I didn't know it was the other thing. But
well, I think we should probably explain to some people who may have not know about this.
Yeah.
Do you want to just go ahead and say what the wisdom tooth issue is with Sammy Sosa?
Please do.
So essentially, Sammy Sosa was a pretty good player before he went to the Cubs, and then somehow within a couple of years he ended up hitting 66 home runs.
Yep.
And with Mark McGwire, both of them saved baseball.
1998, right?
And it turns out there are a lot of other players who also saved baseball by doing the same type of thing. But Sammy Sosa's excuse, or for lack of a better word, excuse for getting so big was not steroids, but rather when he was with the Rangers and the White Sox, supposedly he had a wisdom tooth problem, or like some type of a toothache, which prohibited him from eating food, which is why he was skinny all that time. I've had similar problems, except the other way.
Yeah.
I ate a lot because I had wisdom tooth, but that's again a different topic, different podcast.
You never know what one's wisdom will do to one's career, along with a couple hits of injected, I guess, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
So
Allegedly.
Yeah. So And, as a result of his wisdom, Sammy Sosa had this great career with the Cubs. And, that summer of love, or whatever they call it, where Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, brought back the fans after the 94 strike, right? The summer of hate or whatever. And yeah, there was that great home run chase at the end. And Mark McGwire won, and Sammy Sosa came in second, and, Luis Gonzalez, the Diamondbacks, came in third in that summer of love, right? So, but Sammy Sosa ended up having this great career then, and he was a part of a bunch of commercials and all over TV, and people fell in love with him. And I guess he kind of fell in love with himself and decided that if he was doing this well as himself on roids, allegedly, maybe if he lightened his skin, he'd be even better.
Yeah.
So. And George Bell kind of went the other way, right?
Yeah.
The one great season with the White Sox, and now the baseball not soon after.
Yeah, I mean, George Bell is interesting. He's like one of those cases where, like, you'll see a guy play really well for a lot of years, back to back to back, and then he'll have one bad year, and he's out of baseball. It's like, I don't really understand why I don't really remember hearing anything about that.
I don't either, but I have noticed that over the years. I mean, I've been watching baseball a long, long time. It seems to be more common than one may think. And, I mean, I don't know if this is the best example, but the first one that comes to my head now is, you remember how on top of the MLB world Roy Halladay was before he got that first year with the Phillies?
Yeah.
And he signed that 4-year deal. Well, he did get hurt, I believe, in year 3, and he retired shortly after that. But he was so good, you thought this guy was going to go along, many more years with success, and he's gone. And look at someone like Ryan Howard. Like, what happened to him all of a sudden?
I know, yeah.
So it does happen quite a bit. I mean, one argument is, I don't know about in George Bell's time, but now with these mega contracts, sometimes people think that players are motivated to get the big contract, and when they cash in, they kind of, it may be human nature to kind of lose focus or kind of relax. I don't really know. But it is an interesting phenomenon that's happened for many, many years.
Yeah, and he was such a good player, too. He was like a guy who would hit home runs before the steroids era. I mean, 47 home runs in 87, that was unheard of. Although 87 was like a weird year. A lot of people hit a lot of home runs.
I think Will Clark was one of those. Will Clark, that may be his all-time the best season ever for home runs, I think.
Yeah, and McGwire hit 49 home runs as a rookie. And like
that's right. Most of those at the All-Star, before the All-Star break, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
He had like 36 before that.
Yeah. People thought he was going to break the single-season record. Oh, wait, he did. Oh, he did. Thanks to his wisdom, he eventually did.
Yeah.
But then Barry Bonds' wisdom surpassed that, so.
Yeah. But it's just kind of interesting. George Bell.
Corey Schneider had some great seasons then, too, didn't he?
That's right. He had 36 home runs. So, like, 87 was, like, an interesting year. I mean, George Bell was the best in a season where a lot of people did really well. So, I mean, the guy had talent. He pretty much hit every full season that he played, he hit 20 or more home runs, except 1 year. But even then, he got 100 RBI when that meant something,
Right.
He was like a solid player. Like, anyways, it's just kind of interesting how... And he retired when he was 33.
Yeah.
Which, by today's standards is young, although, for baseball, it might be a little bit old.
Right. Yeah, and that was it 47 home runs in that MVP season?
Yeah, 47 home runs.
So if you think about it, I mean, like you said, it meant something back then. I mean, 50 home runs had rarely happened in Major League Baseball history, and was it 91 when Cecil Fielder came from Japan?
Yeah.
He had 51 home runs, and that was such a big deal. And then the Summer of Love stuff happened, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So, but, they had some help there, right? From either Major League Baseball or whoever.
Well, I mean, I think 87, again, I don't know, 87 was a year. We're like talking about controversy. We always get here. There's always like a controversy to talk about. We like get sidetracked. But I mean, it's appropriate because Sammy Sosa is involved in this. But
Yeah.
87 was an interesting year. A lot of people talk about the juice ball theory.
Yeah.
In fact, that theory came up during the Summer of Love era,
Mm-hmm.
where everybody found that it was like basically steroids.
Yeah.
But there are theories out there that in 87 they tightened up the baseballs
Yep.
to get more home runs. And
Yep.
I actually believe that.
I do too.
So it's just kind of
Chicks dig the long ball, right?
That's right.
So there you go. And so do male baseball fans.
That's
so.
right. So do most men.
Yeah, yeah, and teams needing power hitters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. Amir and I have talked about bottom lines a lot in our previous podcast, and bottom line is the Cubs still haven't won anything, and the White Sox did win a World Series finally, but without George Bell, of course, when they beat the Astros a few years back. But I guess I would give the Cubs the winning edge on this. I mean, just because, whether there's aid or not with, performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, Sammy Sosa did have better numbers. Mm-hmm. He was, became a spokesman for Major League Baseball. Yeah. And, George Bell had the one good season and was shortly out of baseball, too. I mean, how do you feel about who won that trade?
Yeah, I mean, I think I wasn't even following baseball at the time, but I think we were both kids. But
yeah,
I would have thought that it's not a good trade for the Cubs just because there they go again. Like they traded a really good player.
Yeah,
and I can't really justify the reasons for it other than maybe a salary dump or something or like contract thing. But yeah, definitely the Cubs won out. I mean, Sammy Sosa made a lot of money for the Cubs.
He did. He did.
He got a lot of, and he brought a lot of excitement to it. In fact, they made the playoffs with him.
They did.
Whereas the White Sox did not do anything with George Bell.
Right.
So,
yeah. Eventually made Steve Bartman a hero in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Great. So. Amir and I are going to now discuss some of the trade deadline deals after this break, and we'll be back in a second. All right, folks, so Amir and I are back. So we're going to discuss some of the trade deadline deals in this 2014 Major League Baseball season that just ended in victory for the Giants.
Yay!
Yeah. So, in an earlier podcast, Amir and I did do a trade, we did a podcast where a portion of it was dedicated to the trade deadline, and we discussed kind of our predictions for some of those along with what we thought of those deals at the time as far as the players involved. So Amir, we'll go in chronological order here. What's the first trade that came up was Jeff Samardzija, the Cubs deal, right?
Yeah.
Cubs and A's.
Yeah, Jeff Samardzija, Jason Hamill for Dan Straley, Addison Russell, and Billy McKinney.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you in hindsight, you think about it, you're like, well, the A's didn't win it all, but I mean, if I'm the A's, if I'm an A's fan, and they're my second favorite team, just because of geography, I would say I feel a little bad about losing Addison Russell. I'm a little apprehensive because supposedly he is the number one rated player in the minors now.
Yep, he is. He was, thought of in that way in the A's organization before the trade, and I don't know. It seems like that was the first big trade of this kind of deadline time season or whatever you want to call it, and I think people were shocked that the A's got Jeff Samardzija and Jason Hamill in the same trade. And I think it said a lot about they were really going full throttle with winning it all, giving up Addison Russell. And I also think it probably set up another trade they made with Boston that we'll get into in a second, because it's like adding and really going all out.
Yeah.
And it's like it was a great message to the A's fans too, and maybe the rest of Major League Baseball. Hey, we're serious here.
Yeah, I mean their pitching staff was really good. If I don't know if this was before Parker got injured, but I mean that's a formidable pitching staff going into the playoffs.
And they were in first place at the time of the trade. The Angels
Yeah.
are still behind them.
Yeah.
So, yep. All right. So what else we got?
Next one is Houston Street. Trevor got for from the Angels to the Padres. I mean, from the Padres to the Angels for Jose Rondon, Taylor Lindsay, R.J. Alvarez, Elliot Morris.
And Houston Street was the guy the Angels have been looking for a while now. He really did well as the Angels closer, and was a big reason why the A's did fall behind the Angels. After at the end of July, I believe. So, the Padres had been looking to kind of move him for a while. They weren't going to be able to re-sign him in all likelihood. They're on one hand, it's like they have money to spend, but on the other hand, I think they want to use that money on maybe younger players at other positions.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Houston Street did not have as awesome a career with the Padres. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a point where he blew a lot of save with them.
He did, yeah.
And I remember when he came up with the A's, he was like one of those prototypical closers where, like, there came a point where Major League Baseball teams started to, like, develop closers.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, hey, this pitcher, he's a great pitcher, but he can't go 5 innings, so let's make him a closer.
Yeah, former starters or something.
Yeah. So, like, Houston Street was a guy who's, like, probably never started. And when he came out with the A's, he was, like, really great, and then they traded him again.
Yeah.
And so it was just...
He went to Colorado, right?
Yeah. But I mean, this was a good trade. I'm not sure if he's staying with the Angels. I'm assuming he will be.
Yeah, I mean the Angels always have. I offhand, I'm thinking he's a free agent, but regardless, the Angels have money. They've been kind of crucified in the media for not being able to keep Zach Greinke. After all they gave up to get him, and for other moves that did not work for them, or seemingly not in the first seasons at least. Free agent signees, that is. But
I forgot about Zach Greinke. That's interesting.
Yeah. And then, what happened soon after that trade?
Oh, another trade. So one of the other trades that we've actually talked about in depth in our World Series teams trade history podcast. Jake Peavy came to the Giants for Heath Hembree and Edwin Escobar.
Yeah, 2 future Hall of Famers for Jake Peavy. The Giants blew it, right? So, I mean, Amir and I, we if you heard our previous episode, we kind of played a clip from our third podcast where we discussed that trade, and the bottom line is the Giants won the World Series. I think it worked out. Peavy was a part of them getting to the playoffs and do well in the playoffs, but he helped them get there, and he replaced Matt Cain, right?
Yeah, so. I mean, there's really nothing else to say. Other than, it's really, when you hear that clip, and I really encourage everyone to go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
How much of a buffoon I sounded like.
That's MLB Trade History episode 7 for those who haven't tuned in to that yet, and on iTunes and YouTube as well. So not much we can say, right? Peavy is a free agent, probably won't re-sign with the Giants. No matter what, the Giants have a World Series trophy for the 3rd time in 5 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. The next trade to talk about is John Lester.
Yep, another A's one.
Yeah.
So John Lester coming over from the Boston Red Sox, another free agent to be. Actually, as at the time of this recording, he is a free agent, and the A's gave up at the time their cleanup hitter, right? Yoenis Cespedes.
Yeah.
So what do you think about looking back?
Looking back on it, I actually thought that this was not a good trade initially.
Yeah.
Unless the A's win the World Series.
Yeah.
And obviously it turned out that way. But now that I look at it, I'm all like, this was like a wash.
Yeah.
It's like, now you hear the Red Sox want to get rid of Cespedes. You hear obviously Lester is not coming back to the A's, and
Mm-hmm.
in hindsight, it sounds like Cespedes is not really that valuable player.
Yeah.
And so the A's didn't really want to. They wanted to save money, and they wanted to when they get. It was a good calculated risk at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I felt like it was a bad trade, it seems like it was just you had to do it if you're the A's.
Yeah, and one of the A's beat writers, I think, came out shortly after the trade saying, and we talked about this in the other podcast too, but the A's were going to trade Cespedes anyway in the off season, so why not do it now and then get another like number one pitcher with this great playoff track record? But he ended up sucking in that playoff game against the Royals, and John Lester did, and they give up like 6 runs, 7 runs, I forget, but but it's also, there is a valid argument, I think, too, on the side saying why disrupt the chemistry and give up. Your offense isn't that great. You're giving up maybe your second best offensive player who made his first All-Star team to this, and a great outfielder too, defensive outfielder. So, but the counter to that, Amir, is, well, there is no chemistry in baseball. I don't know. Ask the Giants if there's chemistry in baseball, right? So.
No, I think that's the case. I don't really know. Like, obviously, we're not in the locker room. We don't know if Cespedes is this rah-rah guy. Or,
we just know that Canseco is shooting up McGuire in the locker room in this bathroom stall. But other than that, we don't know about the other stuff.
Speaking of chemistry.
There you go.
Like, literally.
I
mean, I think that's a great point in terms of the chemistry. Because, I mean, there's something to that, to play with people that, like, you get along with. And I mean, the Giants are, like, they're basically more than the sum of their parts. And, and Cespedes, when he got traded, he ended up having his best RBI year. And that means something. And the A's, obviously, to your point, were really, their problem wasn't pitching. Their problem was hitting for the most part. And then when they went down, it was because, although in that playoff game against the Royals, it was their bullpen that gave up the runs. And Lester, too. So I think this was, in my opinion, this was a wash. Well, no, maybe the Red Sox will keep Yoenis Cespedes and he'll end up hitting like 50 home runs, or they'll trade him for some prospects. And I actually, as a Giants fan, I wouldn't mind getting Cespedes to play left field for us.
It's been a long time since the Giants have had a decent left fielder. I think Barry Bonds was probably the last one, right? They certainly didn't have one in 2012, so. I think John Lester is going to sign a free agent contract with a team, not the A's. And then in the offseason of 2015, the Red Sox would trade Cespedes to that team to get Lester back. And then we'll talk about it a year from now. So, so what's up next on the trade deadline docket here?
I wanted to mention one trade that may or may not have been big, but it was the Cardinals trading for John Lackey. And they're basically, John Lackey is the main thing in this discussion, with Corey Littrell and cast consideration for Joe Kelly and Alan Craig. There's a couple of things that really are interesting to me. One is John Lackey actually played really well for them, where he basically had been ostracized by the Red Sox, which is like a lot of the people they traded away. Like,
I think so.
And Lackey ended up playing really well for the Cardinals, and then he had this option to play for the minimum, and that the Cardinals would have picked up, and like Lackey was really pissed off about for some. And so the Cardinals basically are going to get him next year for the minimum, a pitcher who's solid. And then they traded away Alan Craig, who was going to have like a great career with Cardinals, and Joe Kelly was a pretty good pitcher too at some point.
He was, like his rookie year, I believe.
So it's just kind of interesting how they gave up on their kind of really big prospects at some point. But it also goes to show how Cardinals are so good at developing that they don't care about giving some of these talent, some of his talent away. So
Yeah, it's like in the NFL, the Steelers are the model franchise. I think in baseball, the model franchise is probably the Cardinals.
yeah,
And they're not a big market team, but they keep growing these young players. They either turn out great or they can flip them for other established players. So, well, John Lackey too. This reminds me of the John Lester deal because John Lackey won Game 7 of the 2002 World Series as a rookie with the Angels against the Giants. So he had that kind of that part of his, and that was 13 years ago, 12 years ago. But
yeah,
I don't know if that was a part of it too. And it's kind of like the Jake Peavy trade. It's like another established starter with some success in the past, at least. So.
yeah, and he had a really good year. He won 14 games last year.
Yeah, maybe Joe Kelly and Escobar will fight it out for the Cy Young Award with the Red Sox sometime next year or the year after. You never know, right?
And then Alan Craig and Cespedes will cancel each other out for the MVP award.
There you go. Yeah.
And so finally, the final trade we want to talk about.
David Price, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The price is right for Valis Smiley.
yeah, that's right. And so what did you think about this trade?
We talked about it back then. This is more like trade at the time discussion we had, but shocked that the Rays didn't get more.
Yeah.
But as far as this, this episode, we're kind of looking back after the fact, and the easy bottom line answer is the Tigers didn't win it all, and there's some discussion that they may look to trade Price because he has one more year, I think, on his existing contract, or before he's. But I also think that even though the Tigers didn't win it all or go deep in the playoffs, because it seems like they didn't give up much, it was well worth it for them. And they will probably lose Max Scherzer to free agency, and they traded Doug Fister before this season began. So, they have Verlander still with a down season. But, I think it was actually a good trade for the Tigers, especially since it wasn't a rent-a-player kind of trade. What do you think?
I think it was a good trade. Austin Jackson is not really that great.
Right.
He's a good center fielder, but you could get you can get someone, sign someone.
Yep.
And I think Scherzer is gone. I don't think they're going to be able to sign him just because he's just going to cost too much money. So they have Price for another year, and if they want to sign him, if he does really well, they'll pay him the money they were going to pay Scherzer. Maybe he'll be a little bit more expensive.
Yeah. And Smiley, who the Rays got, did really well with them at the end after the trade, but it's hard to kind of replace a David Price, that young, World Series in the rookie year, did well, Cy Young Award winner, multiple All-Star appearances, so.
This is interesting, though, because I think that trade was probably the end of the Rays, I feel like.
Yeah.
Basically, their manager, Madden, is gone.
GM.
Their GM, who was like one of the really analytics guys, he's gone.
Yep.
So they're going to suck for a while.
I
Sorry,
think so.
Rays fans.
When the GM, when he, Feldman, when he went to the Dodgers, that activated a clause in Joe Madden's contract saying if he's gone, then Joe Madden becomes a free agent. And then, and then it also says in fine print, one day you'll manage Addison Russell. So now it's with the Cubs, right? So, but I think you're right. They traded Hellickson a couple weeks ago at the time of this recording, and, I'm sure there's more on the horizon as far as trades and yet another rebuilding process for the Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll bring back Carl Crawford if the Dodgers are willing to eat about 80% of his contract.
Yeah.
So
We'll
Amir and I are going to wrap up here by mentioning a couple of trades that happened in recent weeks around the winter, meetings time, and one of them was between St. Louis and Atlanta, and unfortunately, I'm sure you all know if you're listening to this, during the World Series, Oscar Taveras and his girlfriend were killed in an automobile accident, and this may have been a big factor in the Cardinals going after Jason Hayward from Atlanta, and they gave up another good young, starting pitcher in that deal. And I mean, right now, or any predictions that we won't use in the future look back, or
as long as this doesn't get used as a clip of making me sound.
We'll delete the tape after we upload it.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be gone because the internet never.
What's said on the internet remains offline, or we wish, right?
It's hard to say, but Jason Hayward is a special player, especially defensively, and I think he's a good, solid hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Cardinals gave up was potential.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. It's like if the Cardinals end up winning the World Series and Hayward hits 500 in the series, or gets them there, this is an awesome trade. If Hayward has a decent year, but leaves after the year and the Cardinals don't win, and the players that the Cardinals traded to Braves end up becoming solid players or getting their careers back.
Yep.
If I had to, I'm just trying to think. I wouldn't have done it.
Was it Shelby Miller that went from the Cardinals? I think it was. Jason Hayward. See, here's the thing. Look at the Matt Holliday deal from the A's to the Cardinals. He was a free agent too, or to be, and I think a lot of times the Cardinals get these guys on a short, just a little bit time left on their contracts, and they kind of love that baseball city.
Yeah.
And, I think that, St. Louis is a hitter-friendly park, too, more than Atlanta. He may do well there and fall in love with the fans and may be willing to do a long-term deal at some point coming up. Whereas, the Atlanta's looking to dump bad contracts, and I guess, Jason Hayward versus Buster Posey, right? The whole rookie, and both the rookies at the same time. I think Posey has won that thus far, but Hayward is still young. He's like 25, I believe. So.
Yeah, I think. I think I wouldn't have done it, to be honest. I'd try to sign Hayward if I were the Braves.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy getting a guy who can hit really well and play as well defense as Hayward does. And I think he's pretty well established that he's a good player,
Yeah.
And he's young, but maybe they didn't want to pay for it. Maybe they don't have the money. It sounds like they are strapped for cash. They're trying to get rid of a lot of their players.
But also, I think they see big things in the future for B.J. Upton. So, he'll fit nicely there in that, replacing Hayward role, right? So, all right.
Yeah, and then...
earlier today, at the time of this recording, there was the A's making a big trade with the Toronto Blue Jays involving Josh Donaldson, third base all-star for the A's, or now with the Blue Jays, which came to a shock to many people. But I think the A's are, when they got knocked out of the playoffs early by the Royals, I think people knew they were going to be in rebuilding mode once again for the umpteenth time in umpteen years, right?
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this offline, but we talked about how the Pablo Sandoval signing with Boston really affected Blue Jays. The urgency the Blue Jays had they really wanted him, I think you mentioned. And it's just kind of interesting. I think what's so funny is, I can imagine a scenario where, the minute Pablo Sandoval signed with Red Sox, since the Blue Jays had interest in him, Billy Beane gets on the phone, starts dialing up the GM for Toronto. It's like, hey, you want to have Donaldson? Give me some of your talent. And
well, supposedly the A's got overwhelmed by what the Blue Jays offered. And again, Amir would do a next year season review for that trade, or some kind of season review. But I guess the Blue Jays inquired, earlier this season or before the season. The A's said no way, and they came back with this great package that Billy Beane couldn't refuse, I guess. I love following trades. One of the reasons why I like doing this podcast with you. And, the Blue Jays kind of have an interesting history with third baseman trades. I mean, I'm thinking of they acquired. Oh, who am I thinking of? They made a trade, Scott Rowland,
Yeah.
to the Reds, right, for Edward Encarnacion,
Oh, that's
who did well with them, was released, not picked up by any other team, brought back, and he's become this like star with the Blue Jays.
Yeah.
And there's another there's another big trade they made, and I'm drawing a blank now for a third baseman. It may have been. Can you think of?
Was it Kelly Gruber?
This was after Kelly Gruber. It's in recent times, and for some reason I'm drawing a blank on it. But they seem to have done well with these third base, these deals, trades involving third basemen. So who knows? Maybe Josh Donaldson will be, will continue that legacy of that position in trades for the Blue Jays.
Well, what's interesting about Donaldson is if you think about it, he might be the best third baseman in the major leagues, stat-wise, if not...
Including defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And time again, at least the last couple of years, he's been at the top of the list for, dollars per production.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's the cheapest guy for the production that he gives. So, and he's good. I think the Blue Jays have him for a few more years.
Yep.
And who knows? I don't really know much about these prospects. They could be top 10 or whatever, but and I think this is actually a good trade for both of them because the A's get somebody on the cheap. The Lowry, they have a third baseman, which, as the Pablo Sandoval signing shows, third basemen are hard to come by, especially if you can hit. And this Lowry guy can hit.
Yep.
He's not great, but he can hit, and he's a third baseman.
Yep.
And they get two prospects, and they gave up a third baseman. They already filled Donaldson's position, and Donaldson could be an all-star for the next few years on the cheap for the Blue Jays. And they were gonna spend $100 million on Sandoval, so they saved themselves a lot of money. So.
And maybe let's kind of close up this episode. The A's may have some hope that with Brett Lowry and these pitchers that are coming to Oakland, that just maybe, in part or in full or beyond, it kind of covers up the Addison Russell trade too. If you kind of look at filling 3 spots versus keeping a shortstop, Addison Russell, in the Samardzija Hamill trade. But again, the A's do have a lot of pitching, but they'll probably look to move Samardzija. They won't re-sign Hamill, and they won't re-sign Lester in all likelihood. So, but then, like you said before the show, they have 2 guys coming back from injury too. So we'll see. Maybe these guys will be future trade bait for another fire sale or another World Series or nothing or bust run, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So we'll wrap it up there, everyone. So thank you, Amir, so much.
Thanks, Scott. And
all right.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yeah. If you guys have any trade requests from really any era, I mean, email us mlbtradehistory@gmail.com. And these podcasts are up in multiple places, among them iTunes for free and YouTube for free. It's on YouTube, MLB Trade History Podcast. All right, guys, take care.